Hey guys, got another art update here, art vlog.
So this is the finished product after the week. It's not done, but that's where we ended up in the week. Here's a quick Instagram challenge I did. Go check it out. So at the end of the previous vlog, I had mentioned that I'd started using this app that's currently on screen called Smash Studio, where you can rig pixel art and use it to pixel art animation, 2D animation. I don't think I actually want to go with that because I want more of a traditional look and I want things to actually change what they look like. I don't want to be moving pieces around a screen. I want to do traditional fluid animation. Speaking of which, let's get right into the animation I did end up doing. I don't know why I decided to go with doing the puss ball here rather than any character. That might seem to resonate more with people, like to start with a character. But something about just creating a nice little fluid effect, more satisfying, and I think the results are always much more rewarding. I haven't broken up any of the artwork into layers yet. Largely they are flattened onto one thing, so I have to break them up into different pieces. So I've broken up the back kind of gaseous form of the puss ball, and I'm just creating a little rotation for it here so that it undulates. This is the first thing I'm doing any kind of animation with in Aseprite. A lot of little things I have to figure out here. It doesn't seem to have any sort of apply to all frames thing that I can tell. I would very much want to know what that is. If anyone has the answer, please leave a comment. Look at it go. It's fun. Lowering the opacity on the whole layer and adding an outline, which I found out add outline effect works for all frames. Strong, very important, because you can animate something, shape, and then add these outlines to strengthen your artwork. It's less time consuming to draw a shape than it is to draw a line. You can think more of the silhouette, which is more important anyways. It's more valuable how we read things on screen. And the reason for the outline, because I might just have avoided adding outlines, is it adds clarity. It distinguishes this object from another object. And when you're limited in pixels, I think you really have to make everything really stick out and strong and be readable. And here I am finally animating the actual ball of the puss ball itself, broken it up into its parts. I've taken away the shine, the inner shadow, and the fluid inside. The puss, I'm just animating the ball. Idle loop that makes it jiggly, because like things that jiggle, it's just inherently pleasing and appealing. It implies the physics within. Later on, when I do the puss going back and forth, it rationalizes why the ball is moving at all. Some way there, one is acting upon the other, or the other is acting on the first. Either the ball moving moves the puss, or the puss moving moves the ball, or both. It doesn't really matter, it just looks nice.
Just buy it. You don't have to rationalize everything.
We get to get away with a lot, just whatever looks good and whatever works, because with limited pixels
comes great responsibility.
The ability to portray exactly the oval that I want or exactly the movement that I want. I either have to overshoot, I have to do more, I have to embellish the animation. So I've started the fluid inside. I animated this with the on the ball layer. Ultimately, I'm trying to keep this as simple and flattened as possible. No reason for that, that just makes my life harder. And my original idea was to could use masks. I don't think I can use masks in Aseprite. I have not looked this up. Again, if I am wrong and people know the difference, please let me know. Please leave a comment. Ross just moved it left to right on screen and masked it within the shape of the ball. And that'll make it look like waves are going up and down. And the darker part of the wave is moving from right to left, thus creating a rotation feeling of the inner fluid ball, right? If there's a very even pace within itself, what is creating the movement in the ball? And or shouldn't the ball moving create some sort of movement within the ball? It just works. There's an aspect of the arts that I think is you just have to go with your gut a little bit through learning tips and tricks, but eventually they become ingrained. It's really you learning to understand the intrinsic parts of yourself. What do you like and what don't you like and why? You just have a rationale, a backing of knowledge for why you're going with your gut if anyone asks. But really you're just more confident in your gut, your artistic gut flora. If there's any animators out there, I watch the movement probably more than I draw anything in animation because I spend a lot of time assessing the movement. Is it moving well? Is it moving too fast? Is it moving too slow? Is it moving believably? Because there's an endless amount of things that you might animate is the ability to look at it and discern, is it believable? Is it passing? It doesn't need to be spectacular in its movement. It needs to be passable. It needs to be believable. I look at this and understand that that's a fluid. I look at this and understand that that's jiggly. That is jiggly. And that's what you want. Spectacular is kind of subjective. And now that I've created the silhouette for the movement, I'm going through and creating, let's say, the back side, the darker portion of it that creates another level of depth to this so that it's not just simply a 2D flat splooshing liquid, but it's actually a 3D rotating in-depth fluid. And here I am finally deciding to finalize the background. It was nice doing some animating, but I need to finish the actual canvas. So I've created something like 4 roughs already for this background, and you'll see here that I'm going with none of them. The exploration I did for the backgrounds before were mostly compositional in nature. Like I know I wanted an object here, I know I wanted a certain color feeling and a certain color harmony for the background, and I don't diverge from that too much. I actually end up using my background reference to readjust later. As you'll see, I go with a completely different color palette, and then I end up backtracking towards my color profile because that's what's going to keep everything feeling harmonious, feeling in the same environment, But you'll see that this looks nothing like my reference rough in the background. With how the pixels work, it's really hard to get any rounded object. And so I decided to go with a much more layered plateau quarry feel here. It just really sold rock right away. And you'll see also, I'm just trying a lot of things. And what ends up being the final product here is it goes through a number of stages and iterations, adding some cast shadows because that gives me some depth, some cross contour describing the features. The same thing with the lines that are going left and right across the surface. surfaces describe the three-dimensionality and the depth. The cast shadow also describes that three-dimensionality. However, at this point, I'm starting to realize, oh, that perspective don't really work. We're pretty much flat where the characters are standing. So we're going to have a perspective at 0, which is to say a flat line just above them. And anything above that, we shouldn't see the top of because it's above our horizon line. Our horizon line is very low, nearer to the character's feet. Here is now that completely altered perspective. I still am showing a little bit of that top because my thinking here was that I'm actually going to reuse this to create duplicates in depth going into the cave. You know, this is just the frontmost facing wall, but we're going to have a few of these. And the reason why we see a little bit of the top in that bottom layer is because that's actually going to be lower and towards the back for one of the reuses of this object. And beyond that, it doesn't really fit the color palette at all, right? The walls are meant to be the Lich's layer. And so it should really be more of his color scheme, not the player's color scheme. That aside, I do like the ledge the Lich and the characters are on being bright and vibrant because that draws the eye. So here I am trying to actually adjust it for that concept. Like I want this to seem more like the Lich's layer. So I created an inverse layer and I was thinking to use that as a possible shadow where I cut away where the highlights would be and I use this much bluer, much more menacing color. I'm really just playing around with a lot of things. I know I want this to recede to be less attention grabbing. Actually, I don't realize about the contrast and brightness adjustment for a while. And that's what I ultimately end up doing is removing contrast, removing brightness to make something recede. I'm doing now what I was always planning to do, which is adding a little bit of blue or a little bit of purple to create this atmospheric effect that the room would have. And so I'm going depth by depth layer with this and adding more blue with each layer. So I've actually created a duplicate of this mountain, and that's where I've created the max amount of this purple, and I'm erasing areas that are closer and closer to screen. And so things that are furthest away have the most purple blue, and as we get closer and closer and closer, it becomes more the yellow that we see on the cliff in the front. So that way, things that recede past the cliff that the players are on will be blue, a purplish blue that lets the characters stand out, but there's a nice transition to the yellow that the characters are on, thus implying that it's the same kind of rock that is all throughout the cave. Here I am finally duplicating the full layer where I'm now starting to play around with what would the composition of these mountains look like, right? I wanted probably 3. I wanted 3 depth layers of this wall, of this mountain face. Here I took my rock face and I've resized it. I'm trying to just get a little bit of a different thing happening by resizing it. This is not recommended. It's actually very much not what you should be doing. You should not ever resize things in Aseprite or in pixel art because it will have to start assuming where you have 1 pixel, there needs to be 2 5 pixels. I'm doing this realizing that I will have to redraw this to a degree, but what I want ultimately, what would be an interesting pattern for them to overlay on each other? You know, what works, what doesn't work? I'm trying to look at the whole here and just try things. And then I end up actually liking that back piece the most because it's got a lot of this like implied detail and implied randomness that the frontmost, my initial rock wall was just too even, too balanced, and something about the backmost wall kind of feels like an ancient city in the way that it is. It just looks like a bunch of skyscrapers all close together, and that's just like inherently nice. The color variety that came from trying to create that depth, but then copy pasting it as a tile set around just also made it interesting. Here I realized that I actually liked the color options that were happening in that last rock wall that I made. So I'm shifting that first wall to be both perspectively and in design and in color more like that back piece because that first wall is now looking really out of place. So now I'm pretty pleased with how it's all turning out. It feels really harmonious with the rest of the objects that I've already created, that player cliff edge and the Lich's cliff edge, but it's still drawing too much attention. I'm not getting enough feeling that these things are receding in depth. And so I'm trying to create an atmospheric effect. I don't want to take away from the screen real estate around the Lich. I want there to be compositionally space for his movement and his animation and for him to read clearly. I don't want any accidental overlap with other objects that might create something weird or ambiguous. I want everything to be very clear and clean. And so ultimately, after creating the ceiling, I decided to make all those aspects really small, remove a lot of the detail, because again, I don't want to bring any attention to it. And I'm thinking more about compositionally. I want to keep the parts that are important clean and clear. And those things that are important are the players and the enemy, or the UI. Those are the things that need to stand out the most. Everything else is a nice to have. So here I am actually receding it now with the contrast and brightness tool. And I like it so much that I think I start doing it on all the other layers right after this. Wow, that works really well to recede this. Really makes this recede into the background. So I start flattening some of the cave layers and I start applying this onto them to at least just see. I'm pretty pleased with what I have here in terms of the rock wall and the ceiling now. And so I'm going in and trying to fill in that last little piece just behind the Lich of the wall. You can still see the background rough there. So that's definitely an unfinished area. And I'm going, okay, well, I can hopefully copy paste what I already have and do again behind the Lich what I had done for all that rock wall. Create a duplicate, augment it, fix up the art a little bit, and then I have existing texture that's back there. And I definitely want it to be darker than everything we have already. So having toned down those new pieces, those 2 new rock walls, I'm now trying to just fill in the remaining blanks of the wall itself, the very backmost wall. And realizing that this is going to be the backmost wall, I'm probably not going to have really any texture noticeable at all here. And so I'm really just trying to fill in some random texture that implies giant scratch mark type rock walls that'll then blur, decontrast, just to have the barest amount of difference in the background. So I'm not too worried about what I'm actually doing here. I just want to create something somewhat interesting. As I do that, I go, okay, well, maybe it's kind of vine-like and they crisscross, and because I am going to be creating vines that go throughout the rest of this, as was the plan in the rough. The vines that are all around his throne are actually going to be all throughout this room, and them being such a clear object is going to give us a sense of scale. So those puss balls are actually going to be copy-pasted all throughout this room with less and less scale all the way going down, and their color is going to create this nice rim lighting everywhere back there. I will still need to add those vines everywhere else on all those. So just like the rock wall, I end up copy pasting in a tile-like fashion all of that vine-like texture that I had made back here, but realizing that some pieces worked better than others in that tile work, I start going in and duplicating a portion of it to create another layer of depth for this back wall. Instead of using the previous cave wall edges, I'm going to use this weird lattice of vines, make that this final depth for this back wall. And so here I'm not really interested in the detail. I'm realizing I'm going to be losing a lot of that to toning down the contrast and darkening it. Here I am trying to add that same atmospheric sphere gradient back there, because it's just all black and I think it just needs a little bit of tonality. So I'm actually painting on with a color layer, setting one of the layers to color, and just adding in a bit of the green of the lich, a bit of that purple that is the lich, to again tile this together to his color theme. And what I actually didn't manage to record, he's supposed to be a lich, he's supposed to be kind of undead, we have all these skulls, let's have faces back here. Instead, utilizing the vines that are already there, and I just drew in, I just made these kind of screaming faces, implied vines, kind of dripping off of it to give it scale, a sense of scale. Another thing you'll notice in this final image is that I actually changed the canvas size to be wider. The image was feeling very claustrophobic, and so I decided to have it be wider. This gives a little bit more space to now allow for this background weird tree faces that I've created to actually be seen on screen. It makes the whole thing feel less congested. Now the characters are far away from the enemy, we have more space for the UI, and I think it just looks better. A nice aspect of this is we get to have black bars on the top and bottom. Criterions, they're called. Man, that was killing me when I was recording this last time. Criterions are what the black bars are called. That's it for this week. I am off to finally animate these characters. I'm really gung-ho to start doing that. I might do the vines, but definitely animating the characters. I want to get into that and do some cool stuff with the spiraling of the lich and the little bobs of the characters. I already have an idea of kind of what I want them to do for idle animation, and I'll eventually have to do attack animations and hit animations for all of them as well, because that's going to be needed for the scene. Anyway, see you next week. Thanks for watching.
Oh, dark text.